labor was and painful, but I didn't mind when I saw those two babies. That was my first labor of love. My second labor of love was when I went to work. Now, I loved my job. Now, most people would have said, code enforcement? You love your job? Yes, I did. Because I thought of it as a positive action for the community. I thought I was helping my city improve its looks, help the neighborhoods improve, and uplift everything. So I went into my job with a positive feeling, a labor of love. Not everybody agreed, but that's okay. But my third labor of love was truly the one that had the most impact on me. And that was the labor of love, being a hospice worker for my family. Now, I'll have to tell you, in 7 years, one right after another, we had 1 or 2 deaths in the family. Started with my nephew who was killed by a alcoholic driver. Following year, exactly the same day, 1 hour later, my brother-in-law, then my younger sister, then my older sister, then my aunt, and then my uncle. So we had a hard 7 years. But I learned that being a hospice worker is truly a labor of love. Started with when my mother was ill. Now, this was quite a few years before that. My father was very attentive to my mother, but I would go up on the weekends. They lived in Redding. I was here in Sacramento. So I would go up on the weekends and relieve Dad so he could have time to go bowling, which he loved to do, and a food shop or a clothes shop, whatever he needed to do just to have a look. Once Mother passed away, we had a few years of wonderful time with my father and family. But when my father had his 3rd cancer surgery, colon cancer, I decided he needed more attention than just me coming up on the weekends. So after being there, following the surgery, making sure he was okay, I literally went back to work and gave him my 2 weeks notice. Wasn't something planned, but I was happy to do it. And I think it must have been a God thing, because I got home, called my friend and said, you know, I really think I need to go up and be with my father and take care of him. And she said, we just got notice that we're being evicted from a house that we're renting because the owner decided to put it up for sale. Wasn't that a blessing? She needed to be out. I need somebody to move in and take care of my house. And I went up and I was with my father. The true labor of love truly, truly is when they pass and you give them a bath. Who would ever think that you would remember that? But that really closed it for me as I bathed my father and dressed him. He looked so handsome when he was done. In fact, when we went to the mortuary and said we were there to sign the papers away for our 97-year-old father, the mortician said, I don't think he's come in. I don't see him. And we said, well, yes, he is. There he is. And he said, he's 97. That's how good he looked. I was so proud. Then I had really, truly the opportunity to be the hospice caretaker for my older sister. It's funny how families are. My older sister would have given you the shirt off her back. She would have lent you whatever money, but she had a hard time giving from herself. And the same with my little sister who had passed away. In fact, if you probably asked me, I told her to tell you she was a taker. There are takers and givers in the family, and definitely she was the taker. And it's funny, the two middle children, my brother and I, who are still alive, we were the givers. We're the caretakers in the family. I had the opportunity to be a hospice for my older sister. This time, what was wonderful is my brother came the week before she passed away. So he and I took care of my sister at the end and washed her all up and put her in the dress that she wanted to be cremated in. We just made her look beautiful. Of course, when she was the makeup artist, probably we didn't do quite a good job as she would do, but we even got her false eyelashes on. But I have to tell you, two people that have never done a false eyelashes, between my brother and I, we probably had more tears coming down our face from laughing because we'd have the eyebrows up here, and it was just a fun time, if you can believe. But truly, through a lifetime that I've had, the labor of loves that are meant the most to me are those of them with family. First giving birth to my two beautiful children, and then being able to be a hospice caretaker for others. So if you have the opportunity to help somebody in your family to be a hospice worker, if it comes from the heart, if it's a labor of love, please step into that role. It'll be one you will never regret. Thank you.
Hey, that was great, Karen. Thank you for sharing that. Wonderful, wonderful story. All right, so the next person up is Lori Friedman. And this is Lori's first time sharing a story on Zoom, or I think this is her first time sharing a story at any kind of storytelling event. Is that true?
Too true, too true.
So let's give her a big jazz hands, applause, encourage her to step on up and tell her story. Come on, Lori.
I think I should quit now with that applause. Thank you, it's been lovely. No.
Good try, Lori. It's your
Oh, good try. Not quite, huh? Yeah. Well, I'm a friend of Ed Lewis's, and he started me listening to storytelling a few months back, and then I heard about this one about work, and I thought, I've got a story. Not quite as poignant as the previous storyteller, but a little traumatic, so maybe it'll do. And so normally, you get a job and you're there, 1 year, 2 years, sometimes 10, 20, 30 years. Well, my story does not quite fit those parameters, but we'll get there. A bit of a background. So we're talking about my first job, but as I said, we'll get there. A bit of a background. I'm going for the sympathy vote with my checkered college career, because I started, a high school teacher of mine recommended that I go to Shimer College, which is a small liberal arts school in Illinois. Great books, plan of learning. So you study original sources. You don't read about Freud, you read all his original works, which, I was just young and naive at that point. I didn't, I don't really care about reading original Freud if I had thought about it, but I didn't think about it beforehand. Also, in our chemistry class, for some reason, we were studying phlogiston. I don't know if anyone's heard of phlogiston. No one has really. It's what they thought in the 1600s heat was. So something would get hot because you put phlogiston into it. Now, this is not a very useful subject to know about, but if anyone has any questions about phlogiston, I'm your person. I know quite a bit about it. Useless. And then after a year, I got a letter in the mail saying they'd run out of money, they were quitting. Now, this was too late to think about other colleges. There I was, collegeless, but luckily, another high school teacher of mine had taught us in ecology and was down in Mexico, had started a medical project. So I went down to help him for a few months and learned Spanish, which was very useful. Came back up to San Francisco, and some friends were going to San Francisco State. And so I said, oh, okay, why not? You know, maybe when you guys were young and naive, you thought more about things, but I apparently didn't. And it was 1968, just when the riots hit. So the timing was impeccable. Basically, all the classes quit, and I don't know what I was doing besides going to protest and trying not to get arrested. So then a friend at some point said, well, you've got to finish college. There's a liberal arts school at UOP called Raymond College. Why don't you go there? So I said, okay. Went to Raymond College, liberal arts. This was almost worse than Shimer, believe it or not, because at Shimer, at least there was a semblance of a curriculum. This was in the era of, tell us what you want to learn, what you want to study. That's what the organizers, the professors would tell. And I didn't know. I was 20, whatever it was. What did I know? So I started taking science classes at the regular college at Stockton, UOP. And because I wanted to learn something solid that you could, and the sciences were definitely a direction for myself. Well, about 6 months out from graduating, this is a long story to get to the job thing, but it's all good information. So about 6 months out from graduating, it finally dawned on me, what the heck was I going to do with a degree in liberal arts? Maybe be a secretary, I don't know, go on. Luckily I realized this before it was too late. Well, I wouldn't go to the people at Raymond College because they would have said, well, what do you want? And I didn't know. So I went down to Delta College, the Career Placement Center, and I said, help, I'm going to graduate in 6 months and I don't know what. And they said, this was a 5-minute conversation to determine the rest of my career. Well, what are you good at? And I said, well, I'm good at details. And he said, well, how about medical technology? That's working in a hospital lab. It pays well, you'll be able to travel, blah, 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 take you a year of sciences. I said, that sounds good. So applied to San Jose State. I hope your career planning was a little more in depth than mine was. Applied to San Jose State. They have a field, a degree in microbiology with a concentration in laboratory technology. So doesn't that sound erudite? Yeah. And well, he had said a year, it was 2.5 years of sciences later that I graduated, but I love the sciences, a lot of medicine and that kind of thing. It's pretty good fit, actually. And then I was really enjoying being in school. I would have just kept going, but apparently most of the people were applying for their year of training in a hospital lab. So I thought, well, everyone's doing it, I guess I better. Applied for that and got in at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, did my year of training. And that was lovely because we'd go to the beach after work in the afternoons. That was quite nice. But then getting ready to finish, the thought was, well, I guess I better think about work. And a friend of mine in elementary school, her father was the head of research and development at Irwin Memorial Blood Bank. This is getting to the denouement of the story. So I thought, well, let me contact him and see if there's a job. Well, I did, and they were delighted. I went up for an interview to San Francisco. They were delighted to get a licensed med tech. And so he essentially gave, offered me the position. At some point I asked him, well, I hopefully asked him what was the work like. And he said, well, talk to the people doing it. And unfortunately, I never kind of had time. And so I went back to Santa Barbara, packed up my stuff, and there I was off. Well, I should have known, because this was not an ideal job. The hours were 4 to 12 at night. So there goes all your social life. The pay was $1,100 a month. But you got paid extra. What the job entailed was matching or organ donation. So you got paid extra if a cadaver came in late at night. So that was a bonus to think about. But so I showed up to work the first day, and it turns out this tissue matching, you take a little bit of the tissue from the donor organ and a little bit of the tissue from the recipient, and you're going to mix them together, and then they're going to mix for a while, and then it's about a 4 or 5 hour process, and then you add a reagent and it mixes some more, and then you do something else and it mixes some more, and it's horribly tiresome, and you better not make a mistake or you'll give the wrong organ to somebody, to the wrong person. Well, by 12, by coffee break that morning, I was saying, I don't think so. And so I started looking, the San Francisco Chronicle was there on the table. I started looking through at want ads, and found a couple of job offers for MedTech, told the people that I needed a few days of personal leave. And they said, no problem. I went looking and got offered another job, and called up the blood bank and said, I'm really sorry, I don't think this is going to work out. So my job lasted 1 day. My first job. Luckily, I ended up being fairly successful with that inauspicious start in my career. You'd be surprised to hear, but that was the story of my extensive 1 day first job.
Hey, you did a great job for your first time out. It was wonderful, very entertaining. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome.
All right.
Nice audience. Thank you.
All right. So the next person up is Terry Chekon.
Hey, good evening, folks. Let me get her set up. I'm gonna
Is everybody getting the sound right? Okay for people sitting at the Poetry Center?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
All right, good.
Okay, here you go, Dave.
All right, well, next is Terry Chekon. She's been a longtime member of the Sacramento Storytelling Guild. She often tells very entertaining stories, and I'm sure she will dazzle us with one today. Go ahead, Terry, you're on.
Well, I don't know about dazzle, but my story is called Weird in the Workplace and Beyond. And the story came about because of storytelling. Back in the late 1970s, a professional storyteller came to Sacramento. I think he may have been Sacramento's first professional storyteller. Will Perry is his name. He's a very active, dramatic storyteller. So as the coordinator of children's services for the Sacramento Public Library, I hired him to do programs. I know the schools hired him. Fairy Tale Town hired him. And because Will came to Sacramento, a young librarian came from the state of Michigan looking for a job with the Sacramento Public Library. And at the time, we only had a temporary summer job. And we may have interviewed other candidates for that job, but the one we hired was Vera R. And I'm using her real name because I don't think anyone here remembers her unless Gail Lyle is telling today. And Gail might remember her. Vera, as I say, came from Michigan. And what made her distinctive in her interview was that she brought something with her, or someone. She brought a puppet. And she answered some of the questions that we asked with her puppet. Now, we thought since we were hiring her as a children's librarian, that showed originality and imagination. So we hired her for this temporary job. But after a few weeks, her supervisor said, I don't think I want to pick her up on a permanent basis. It wasn't her work with the children, it was more her interpersonal skills. Still, the supervisor was new in her first supervisory position. We thought maybe she was being a little hard on Vera. So a few months later, when we were hiring on a permanent basis, another librarian decided to take his chances with Vera, that maybe he could salvage her. And she was put in a position where she worked at 3 small libraries in the city of Sacramento, one 3 days a week, the other a day each. And maybe this librarian would have salvaged Vera, but he was from Alameda County in the Bay Area. And he left to go back to his native Alameda County for a job. And her next supervisor was a very patient woman with a lot of supervisor experience. And we thought she might be able to salvage Vera, although I had heard from one of her co-workers at the Colonial Heights Library that Vera's approach to reference questions was a little strange, that a young man came in the library and needed information on Julius Caesar, and Vera responded with, "He lived a long time ago, didn't he?" Which wouldn't exactly reassure the patron. But that librarian left, that supervisor, and a new supervisor came who was by the book and began to document Vera's behavior. And by this time, we think Vera was living out of her car because she was washing her hair and some of her undergarments in the staff restroom at this little library, the Mabel Gillis Library in the Talbot Village area of Sacramento. So when this persisted, we had to have a meeting with Vera's union representative. And it turned out that it was a young man. And that young man turned a shade of a color of red, or maybe salmon, that was quite pronounced. And one of our later storytellers is wearing a dress today that would be that color. And I felt sorrier for him than I did for anybody else in the interview. But since it was the first time that we had actually had a meeting about Vera's performance, we kept her on, but we realized that these 3 small libraries were closing and that they were going to open a new big library on Stockton Boulevard, the Colonial Heights Library. And there was no way Vera was going to be able to handle that move. So we transferred to a small library in East Sacramento, the McKinley Branch Library. And the supervisor there continued to document Vera's behavior. But then one day the supervisor called me and she said, "Terry, guess what? Vera has resigned, but I don't know if I can accept her resignation." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "She wrote it in pencil and she didn't give it to me. She put it in the outdoor book drop." But she said, "I had talked to my supervisor." Her supervisor was the assistant director of the library. And her question to Vera's supervisor was, "Do you want to accept this letter of resignation?" And of course, Vera said yes. So Vera left our library system, and we thought we'd never hear of her again. But before she left, she did ask me if I would write a letter of resignation. I mean, of recommendation. At that time, still could write a letter of recommendation. You didn't just have to write one of those letters that says so-and-so worked for you from this year to that year. So I felt I had to say something. So I wrote a 1-sentence letter of recommendation, which said Vera presented programs that were enjoyed by some children. And she said, "Karen, can't you say anything else?" And I said, "No, that's what I could say."
because I figured any library worth its salt would know that there were a number of gaps, but it didn't say anything about her knowledge of children's books or other materials. It didn't say anything about her reference skills or her ability to work with others. So Vera left us, but a month later, I got a phone call from a child care center in Yosemite National Park. Vera had applied for a position as a child care worker. Well, fortunately, I could tell them that I only knew her in a capacity as a children's librarian, so I couldn't really recommend her. But after I hung up, I said to somebody, imagine Vera working in a child care center in Yosemite Park. We should take the kids on a hike and probably lose them. Or there's an old participation activity called going on a bear hunt. She'd probably take the kids on a bear hunt and a real bear would show up. So I don't think Vera got that job. But about a year later, I got a call from Seattle Public Library. She'd gone to the Pacific Northwest and she was applying for a job there. Well, by that time, all we could say was that she worked for us from such and such a date to such and such a date. So I did that. And then I figured, that's the end of Vera. But then one of my coworkers called me and she said, Terry, you won't believe this. A friend of mine, whose mother is a hairdresser in Seattle area, well, she had a very strange customer. And I think you and I know who it was. Apparently, the friend called my coworker and said that her mother, the hairdresser, had a client who came in, and while she was washing her hair, the client began to twitch underneath the plastic bib or apron that you wear when you're having your hair washed. And the poor hairdresser thought this woman was having a heart attack, but instead she pulled out a puppet, and the puppet said, she likes the way you wash your hair. So the mother had told the daughter, just because it was an example of weirdness. And the daughter told my coworker for the same reason. But my coworker and I said, that can only be one person. It has to be Vera. Well, we thought that's surely the end of Vera. Years passed and I retired. But one week I'm looking at the weekly newsletter on the computer from the American Library Association. In this weekly newsletter, they would pick up stories from newspapers around the country, library-related stories. And there was one from a newspaper in Wisconsin. It must have been a large town or a small city in Wisconsin. And the story was about the city firing the director of the library in this town or city. And of course, the director of the library was contesting being fired, but the city manager gave his reasons. One was that the person pitted some staff against other staff. Number two, she talked about inappropriate personnel matters with her staff, her personnel matters. And third, she conducted staff meetings through a puppet. It had to be. And I don't know whether Vera was fired or not for that. But all I can say is Vera was definitely weird in the workplace and beyond.
Great story, Terry. Thank you for sharing that. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
And that's a good title, Weird in the Workplace.
All right. So next up, we have our featured teller, Stephen Hobbs from England. I heard Stephen telling a story at a storytelling thing in England a couple of weeks back, and I was just really impressed. He's very funny, and he's going to tell us a mythical story. So I know people have been telling personal stories, all that kind of stuff, but I am really looking forward to a mythological story because we don't often hear those here. I mean, actually, in all the years that I've been doing the storytelling, I've only heard a few. I've done one, but it's not something that we usually hear. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Stephen's Greek myth, and he's going to tell us all about it. You're on, big guy.
Thank you, David. Thank you. And I would like to dedicate this story to Vera because she fits really well into this background. So this is to Vera. There's a shameful secret in the house of Minos. That's King Minos to you, King Minos of Crete, founder of the Minoan civilization, king of kings, builder of the great palace of Knossos, and all the other kings of Greece. They bend the knee to him and send him annual tribute of copper, olive oil, and horses. Mighty Mycenae, proud Sparta, historic Sacramento, upstart Athens, they all bend the knee to him and send him tribute. And oh, the wonder of the Minoan civilization, the drama, the sculpture, the literary fest. Oh, no, you are not here for that, are you? You are here for the shameful secret, are you not? Are you here for the shameful secret? I think you are. Right, well, the shameful secret concerns King Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae. Pasiphae has fallen in love with a bull. It starts innocently enough. She takes it cupcakes. She hangs daisy chains about its neck. But when she looks into its dark, chocolatey eyes, love turns to lust, and lust must be requited. We've all been there. Yes, I'm looking around now. Yes, yes, lust has been requited. But how is this to be done? Pasiphae is a fragrant lady, and the bull, well, how do I say this? The bull is very bull in the bull department. We have a problem now. When there's a problem in Crete and you need to be discreet, who are you going to call? Daedalus. When there's a problem in Crete and you need to be discreet, who are you going to call? Daedalus. She calls Daedalus and invites him for a coffee at the Cafe Knossos. And there she explains her predicament. Now, Daedalus is the Mr. Go-To of Crete, the Mr. Fix-It, the man who has the king's ear. And now it would appear the queen's, he knows exactly what to do. Permit me, madam, he says. He takes her napkin, a piece of charcoal, and on her napkin he draws a model of a most beautiful cow in which there is a secret compartment where Pasiphae may hide herself to receive her lover, the bull. I can have it ready by tea time, my lady. Tea time. And at tea time, he brings this magnificent model. It's more magnificent than the drawing. Pasiphae is so pleased. And I insinuate myself in here, do I? It's very snug in here, Mr. Daedalus. I think I can take it from here now. Daedalus goes away. Mr. Bull, cooey, Mr. Bull. Well, you're going to have to use your own imaginations for what happens next. But what I can say is that there are grasps and groans and grunts and gush and, well, Pasiphae is very pleased. I'm very pleased. I'm exceedingly pleased. They do say that once you've had bull, there's no going back. Yes, I'm pleased. Oh, indeed. I do hope he was a gentleman and took care of things. It couldn't happen, could it? No, of course not. It couldn't. But it does. And soon there's going to be the patter of tiny hooves. But it's a beautiful bouncing baby boy bull. It's a beautiful bouncing baby boy bull. 175.5 pounds. And what of Queen Pasiphae's pelvic floor? My pelvic floor is ruined, but he's lovely. He's got his daddy's nose and his daddy's ears and his tail. He's lovely. Hold him. Wah, wah. Oh dear. Oh dear. There's a problem. But the problem is not what you think. It's not King Minos being cuckolded. He's king of kings. I'm king of kings. I decide the truth around here. Besides, Pasiphae's explained it to me. She made a mistake. It was her God that made her do it. She can see the error of her ways. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. I am king of kings. No, the problem is, no, Minnie, let me explain. The problem is, well, what are we going to call the little chap and where's he going to live? Now, when there's a problem in Crete and you need to be discreet, who are you going to call? Laurie, who are you going to call? Daedalus. They invite Daedalus for another coffee at the Cafe Knossos. And of course, he has the solution. I think, sire, madam, we need to be guided by the science here. Here we have the house of Minos, and here we have the house of Tauros. We'll call the little chap the Minotaur. I've got a couple of spare rooms at the back of the palace, and he can live there. It'll be fine. And for a couple of months, everything is tickety-moo. And the little chap goes from milk to grass to human flesh. He catches a slave, kills it and eats it. Minos is furious. You don't eat inventory. We've got a problem. Now, when there's a problem in Crete and you need to be discreet, who are you going to call? Nick, who are you going to call? Daedalus. They call Daedalus. Of course, he has the solution. He always does. Sire, madam, he says, I'll put a couple of extra panels in. I'll make it like a maze. I'll make it like a double. It will be like a labyrinth. That little chap won't be able to get in or get out. I will only know the way in. And his little dietary requirements, those kings, you know, those kings that send all those horses, why don't you change it to 7 young men and 7 young women? Excellent idea, says Minos. Inform the kings. So a letter goes out to all the kings of Greece, mighty Mycenae, proud Sparta, historic Sacramento, upstart Athens. Dear king, there has been a change to your service agreements. Instead of horses, send 7 young men and 7 young women for bull leaping duties. Please note, we are unable to return the aforesaid mentioned 7 young men and 7 young women. Yours sincerely, customer experience manager, Minoan Power. So the letters go out, and in Athens, it's opened by King Aegeus. Now he has the power to nominate people. Mark, you're off. Laurie, you're definitely going. Vera, she's off on the next ship. Nick, he's going, but he doesn't. He decides to hold a ballot, but he doesn't want to include his son Theseus, his recently reunited bastard son Theseus. Theseus complains. Sire, he says, here is my chance to prove myself worthy of you. But son, says Aegeus, we've only recently been reunited, bastard son. We've not drunk wine. We've not been on a boar hunt. We haven't even been to an oracle. But sir, says Theseus, if I am to inherit your crown, I need to prove myself worthy. By all means, hold a ballot, but I will go in command. Oh, all right then, says Aegeus, if you must. But I shall be watching out for you on a high cliff. Well, not me personally, but you know what I mean. And when you come back, change the black sails to white so we know that you are safe and we can start a party. I'll even put a bull on the barbie. So it's agreed. The ballot takes place. And the 7 young men and the 7 young women, with Theseus at their head, set out for the harbour. And all the population of Athens are behind them. Theseus, Theseus, Theseus. They line the harbour wall. They get into the boat. The black sail is unfurled. The oars are unshipped and the boat pushes out. And all the people wave to them. Bye, bye. Send me a postcard from Crete. Bye, bye. Bring me back a fridge magnet from the labyrinth. And they watch as Theseus sets off across the wine-dark sea for his meeting with the Minotaur and with destiny. There he will find dusty death, abandonment, the death of a bird child, the suicide of his own father. It does not end well, ladies and gentlemen of Sacramento. It does not end well. Cheers.
Thank you, thank you. That was great. I loved your presentation too. It was very, I mean, I was spellbound. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And interesting interpretation of the myth. Thank you for that. Very good.
My pleasure.
All right. All right. So next we have Joyce. Joyce, are you there?
Yep.
All right. I'm sorry, Joyce. Gail never showed up, so you're on next. All right. So I've known Joyce for a long time. She's a long time standing member of the Sacramento Guild, and she's actually very active. She does a lot of that need to do work, sending out flyers, organizing stuff. Anything you need to know, you just go ask Joyce. So anyways, here she is to regale us with a story about, well, her story. Take it away.
Well, this story starts about 62 years ago, 1960. I was a junior at college, almost finished, and everybody in the 1960s, if you could chew gum and walk at the same time, the schools wanted you. They were desperate for teachers. And a friend of mine, who I thought was just flirting, said, come and work for me in Cool. I don't want to move to Cool, so I called 5 school districts in the county where I lived. Got 4 interviews. Now, on this day, I was on the last interview. I wasn't quite sure. I'd had all the basic education classes, Education 101, where they teach you must teach all of the skills that are listed in the state curriculum. You must do democratic things in your classroom. You must make the child feel welcome and taking care of their classroom. I could do that. I'd gone to a small school. I'd never been in a single class grade. So when I entered this last interview, I was feeling nice. It was an old school, probably built in the early 1900s. It had 2 classrooms and 1 extra classroom outside a new building. And when it was built, I don't think they had a bathroom because a bathroom was sort of built on to the 2 rooms. Well, I felt at ease. 3 members of the board interviewed me. They came in from work. They were all small farmers. They were dressed in shirts and Levi's and boots. That's what I wore growing up. They hired me. They were really interested in whether I could put on a Christmas program. Well, I'd been in theater for many years. Sure, I could do that. Next question. Could I sign a contract? Well, yes, I'd sign it. No, the legal age then was 21 and I was only 20. I said, that's fine, I'll sign it now. And before school starts, I'm going to turn 21 and we're all good. And so it went. That summer, I still had my Sac State library card. I went and got all the curriculum guides. I had curriculum guides all over the place. Oh, I was in trouble. I knew how my teachers did it when I was in school, but I had no idea of the background work that they had to do. So that was okay. I do what I could do. I went in and decorated the classroom. And there, out in the separate building, I ran into Mrs. Douglas. I didn't know it then, but she was going to be my guardian angel. That's because she was 1 year older than God. She must have been about 80. To me, who was 21, I thought she was 100. She had forgotten more about teaching than all of my education about teaching had ever taught me, then or since. She said, go and get some of those binders. She did. She lined them up. 3rd grade. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I was teaching the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade of about 32 students in a classroom that was designed for about 20. Attached to my room was the teacher principal, and he had 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Okay, she lined up. This is an easy one. We took out the science. Every year, every grade covered the 4 basic things of science. So we lined up 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. She said, ask some questions, find out what they know, put it all together and teach earth science all across. Everybody gets all the earth science from 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. You use a journal to describe. You put in exploration and in research. That covers that. Reading, she said. Partners. Every child should be able to read their own science book. So you partner up, everybody reads together. The older ones help the younger ones, the better readers help the slow readers. Vocabulary, take all the vocabulary out of the subjects, social studies, science. Teach everybody the same one, and you can stress a little bit. Also, I had 2,000 of the most used words in the printed English language. We had a thing, copied, you sort of achieved one at a time. The 5th grade went fast, the 3rd grade went kind of slow, but they all learned. That was fine. Now, I have to tell you about my principal and fellow teacher in the next room. Mrs. Douglas said it best. I can't tell you what she said. She said he's a jerk. And every time he came to her classroom, she said, get out of here. Now, what they'd been trying to keep her for at least 10 or 15 years. If he fired her, there would have been a lynching. About the 2nd week, the principal came to me and said, Miss Anderson, I'm much too busy to do any coaching. You will have, and Mrs. Douglas is too old, you'll have to coach the upper grade boys in flag football. I don't know anything about football. I've never even seen a flag football game. Well, there's only 9 members, and here's a book. Oh, and by the way, since the kids all walk to school and we don't have any bus, you'll have to also arrange transportation to and from the games. Well, I have to make a little diversion here and tell you that I was a home economics major. I learned all about sewing and child development and all that stuff, but my favorite part was design. And I designed my own clothes, but I liked the French designers. I sewed my own clothes. When I got finished, I bought jewelry and shoes to match. And I always wore 3-inch heels. And these were the days when women had to wear dresses to teach. Got a picture? High heels, a Da Vinci dress, earrings, things to match, coaching 7th and 8th grade boys in flag football. It wasn't pretty. I broke heels. I lost earrings. Well, you would think that things got better, but they didn't, because there was basketball season, baseball season, softball season. Now, you would think things couldn't get worse than this, right? Miss Anderson, I have to go to the county office for a meeting, and my wife is using our car. I'll have to borrow your car to go to the meetings. There were a lot of meetings on a Friday afternoon. And when he went to these meetings, then it was my job to cover the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. He just opened up the door. Well, you would think things couldn't get worse. Christmas comes. There are about 75 kids in the school. Everyone needs to be in the Christmas program. We can hold it next door in the volunteer fire department's community room. Okay, so I arranged to play, and I wrote, and we had songs, and the little kids danced, and okay, and we rehearsed for an hour every day for months. And on the day of the performance that night, I went over and we were looking at the stage and the props, and the volunteer fire department were setting up the chairs. And the chairs went on and on and on in this big room. I didn't want to bother the firemen. After all, that they were doing things voluntarily, but we were never going to need all those chairs. I mean, even if parents, siblings, and grandparents came, we couldn't fill all those chairs. So I went over. I had all my troubles. I had made friends with the wife of one of the school board members. And I said, Mary, what's going on? They have way too many chairs. Oh, she said, no, there'll be standing room only. Standing room only? In a 3-room schoolhouse at Christmas play? You gotta be kidding. Oh no, she said, it's a great tradition. Everybody who went to this school, they all come back for a reunion. It's like a family reunion, it's an alumni reunion for the school. And she was right. There was standing room only. It was a great success, and they gave me a puppy. Well, by the time I got to the end of the year, I had decided that one of my students, I forgot to tell you this, one of my students brought mumps to school. I got double mumps. I was in bed for 3 weeks. Well, I decided I was going to go back to college for a master's in home economics, and I was never, ever, ever going to teach again. The last straw, or next to the last straw, was they had a board meeting and invited the community. Little did I know when I signed the provisionary permit that I had to be released. And the parents had worked on Mrs. Douglas for 15 years. And despite all these problems, I was a great hit. They loved me, and I loved them, and the children, they were great. But I could not put up another year with the next door neighbor. So there were testimonies, and it was something else. But I stuck to my guns, and I resigned. Well, there were tears, and I had to go into the county office, it wasn't too far away, to sign something. And one of the consultants said, Joyce, have you checked out and turned in your material? I said, yeah, I gave them to the principal, and they're in the office. I know they're there because I just looked in through the window and saw them. She said, can you get in? And I said, sure. So I went and I got out my stuff. She said, bring it to me and I'll check you out. Okay. She came in, I signed everything up. There, she said, now you'll be all out of it and they won't even call you. Well, that's a strange way to end the conversation. I found out later, my friend next door got in trouble. He'd embezzled the milk money. Now, I went on to teach 40 years, but that's another story.
Great story, Joyce. Embezzling the milk money. I love that. All right, so next up we have Nick LaForce. So we do this with the Poetry Center, and Nick is our poet. And Nick LaForce is known as the transformational poet. He believes poetry can touch our hearts and transform lives. He integrates poetry into his work as a life coach and in trainings with NLP, hypnotherapy, and coaching. He practiced around the world in China, Japan, Malaysia, England, Greece, Ireland, Spain. Woo, man, that's a lot of places. And he's written a total of 10 books, and they have been translated into Chinese, Italian, French, German, Japanese, and Spanish. So we look forward to hearing from you, Nick. The floor is yours.
No, thank you, David. And great stories today. I've really been enjoying them. And Stephen, since you brought one in that had a mythical quality to it, I thought I would share. I have 3 poems that are relatively short, so I thought I would share one that refers to Scheherazade. And it's called A Million Lifetimes. And it's also kind of an ode to storytelling. A million lifetimes. I drift off into dreamland, easy on the brakes, and every nuance, every shifting shade of day into night is another universe unfolding. Each rolling out a carpet of welcome, enticing my wandering spirit until I step into one, into the arms of Scheherazade, my head in her lap, together in the lantern-lit tent under a million stars. She whispers stories of life, of love, of loss, and of laughter into my longing ears, and I weep for her. I weep for all forgotten lovers. I weep for all neglected prayers. I weep for all the hungry, the homeless, and the helpless who may never know such love. I weep for her to live another night, to tell another tale, to lead me into the netherworld again, where I live a million lifetimes, flinging the twinkling light of each one into the night sky. And I really think that as listeners to tales and storytellers, we have a chance to live other lives. We can live a million lives through the stories we read and the stories we hear. So I'm going to share a poem that is also a story called Joyride. Riding in the back seat of the tricked out sky blue 64 Comet, an albatross on my brother's neck, cruising Main Street as he and Pete bantered about what to do with me. Let's dump him with the pot dealers in the park. Let's turn him over to the dragon lady, they laugh. She will make a man out of him. It was a hot spring night, windows rolled down, motors revving, popping clutches, squealing wheels, the heavy air layered with lust and fumes, girls hanging low-cut out the windows, boys whistling catcalls, and cops on corners barely keeping the whole thing in check. He was my hero, and I wanted to go everywhere with him, which was the last thing he wanted. A kid brother shy of puberty and too young to be in the game. I was only in the car because Mom insisted, partly to keep him in line as much as a way of getting her own girls' night out at the bowling alley. They always found a way to ditch me, and this time they dropped me off at the movies. It was a horror film, something about the living dead. I waited half hour after it was over before they picked me up, scared shitless that the zombies were lurking everywhere. And sure, every breeze on my neck was a zombie's bite. When Don finally picked me up, he leveled me. Don't tell Mom or I will kill you. Say we hung out at Bobby's house. When we got home, Mom could tell I was disturbed. Don positioned himself behind her and was looking at me through those evil eyes. I told her nothing happened. She turned to Don for an explanation. He shrugged his shoulders in feigned innocence. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep, rattled by nightmares. Sure, zombies were everywhere and after me, but Don got what he wanted. I never asked to go out on a joyride again. And then one last one to end, which I think also is an ode to storytellers, because I believe as storytellers and as poets, and in fact, as people who are in the world trying to make good happen, that we are all messengers. So this poem is called We Are Messengers. And I wrote this poem about 6 months before my mother passed away. And then I had a chance to share it at her funeral. And I know for me, I write poems and sometimes really don't know the power and impact of them until later on when something happens. And that was true for this one. And it really came home to me when I shared it at my mother's funeral. It's called We Are Messengers. We are messengers. We may leave our footprints on the earth, but we walk in heaven. Our light shines farther than our own vision. Our words sink deeper than our own wisdom. We teach. What you have lived before does not determine who you may become. And we are learning to follow a simple truth of the heart. What we see in others, we awaken in ourselves. We become what we give to the world. What we see in others, we awaken in ourselves. We become what we give to the world. And as I read that line, looking out at the gathering of people that had come to my mother's funeral, many of whom had touched my mother deeply and whom my mother had touched deeply, I could feel a visceral presence of her in that room, more perhaps than many times I'd ever felt it before in my life. And I knew for a fact she had become what she had given to the world. So my invitation to you as you're going through life and you're telling stories, remember, what you give to the world, you become. And what you see in others, you awaken in yourself. So may you see grace and dignity. Thank you.
Great. That was wonderful. I liked them all. I love that last poem. That's a nice reminder to us all about the power of storytelling. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right. So Mr. Mark Berry now. Mark Berry's filling in at the last minute. You got to applaud him for that. And Mark is a great supporter of storytelling, hands down. He is the founder and directs the Gold Country Winter Storytelling Festival. Did I say it right, Mark?
Foothill, yes.
All right, close enough. And but he's a great supporter of storytelling, and we are grateful that he came up with the idea and followed through with bringing that Winter Storytelling Festival to Auburn. And so I give you Mark Berry.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everybody, especially my dear friends in Sacramento. My voice is a little hoarse. I'm getting over a cold. I apologize for that. And what Dave neglected to tell you is one of his favorite parts of the Foothill Storytelling Winter Festival was the time that I was able to proudly hand to him the trophy, because he won the Liars Contest one year, and the competition was stiff. And I was so proud of David, just did so well. I hope that trophy's in a place of honor in his home. I fell upon storytelling because I love to listen. And after I was around storytellers for quite some time and enjoying my listening, every once in a while they'd look at me. And I thought, oh, I'm supposed to contribute. I'm supposed to give something back. So I became a storyteller by default. Labor, my favorite labor story, and I'll add to it. Anyway, my favorite labor story is this one. my grandfather's name was Jess. And when my grandfather was a young man, that was when during the time when the railroad was connecting the East and West, connecting the United States. And he was about 17 and he was a strapping young man and he needed work. Well, as you may know, the railroads at that time would hire any warm body, didn't have to speak English. And so naturally he got a job. And the foreman said, I'm going to put you next to old Gus. Now, old Gus has been with us forever. And old Gus is the best spike pounder we've ever had on the railroad. So you work next to Gus and then you'll find out what to do. Well, he was placed next to Gus. Now, Gus could take that spike hammer and he could put one of those big, what do they call them? Railroad spikes. He could put that in a tie to hold down the rail with 3 hits every time. Nobody could do it in less than 3, and Gus did it in 3 every single time. The first one set it, the second one pushed it in, and the third one tightened it down snug with the rail and the tie. And so my grandpa Jess worked next to Gus, and he was learning really soon how to do it really well. And after they'd been working together for some time and they were conversational friends, to the end of the railroad line came this beautiful engine, followed by one beautiful rail car. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. And my grandpa, 17-year-old, he's in awe of this. He said, "What, Gus, what is that? Is that the president of the United States or something?" And Gus looked up and he said, "Oh no, that's my buddy John. He's the president of the railroad." And my grandpa was quite puzzled by that. Here a lowly spike pounder was friends with the president of the railroad. And sure enough, one of the windows opened on that beautiful rail car and a head stuck out and waved, said, "Hey, Gus, how you doing? Hey, John, I'm doing great." And from the rail car, "Come over when it's your break time. Come over and chat." "Will do, John." And my grandpa was just puzzled by this. How on earth, why could this happen? And he asked Gus, he said, "Well, Gus, how come you know this guy, John, who's the president of the railroad?" And old Gus said, "Well, 20 years ago, just like you, I had my first day starting and John had his first day starting, and we worked side by side, just like you and me. That's how we happened to know each other." Well, my grandfather was more puzzled than ever. He said, "Now tell me, if you both started on the same day doing the same job, how come it is 20 years later that you're still pounding these spikes and John's the president of the railroad?" And Gus said, "Oh, the answer to that is quite easy. You see, when we went to work that day on 20 years ago, I went to work for $1 a day and John went to work for the railroad." I hope if you have young people, maybe grammar school, middle school, I hope it's not too late by the time they get to high school. I hope you can share this story with them and help some of our young people learn. We would like them to learn something about the value of being productive and being a contributor and giving something to make something of yourself. So if you ever have a chance to tell that story to young people, I hope you do. And I hope it makes sense to them. Well, now I'm going to tell you about my first job. That was my grandpa's first job. My first job, living in San Francisco, California, my beautiful bride, we were 20 and 21 years old, and we believed in happily ever after, and we fell in lust, and we thought we were in love, and we were just cute as anything. And we were both working full time, working our way through college. And I got laid off at my job, and it was around about this time of year, maybe a little later. And anyway, we decided to do some shopping. We were going to do some early Christmas shopping in early November. And we went to the J.C. Penney's department store. Now, if you go back to 1970 in San Francisco, a J.C. Penney's department store was really something. They were getting geared up for the holidays. They had these beautiful window displays of their merchandise. And in each department, they had beautiful displays that were professionally put together. And oh man, the shelves were bulging with goods. There was a hubbub, there was excitement. People were serving each other and people were shopping for their precious gems that they were buying. And I just kind of got hooked on the energy. And you know, it was just, wow, this is a fun place. Wouldn't it be cool to work here? And so I told my little bride, I said, you know, I think I'm gonna work here. I think I'd love to work here. And the holidays are coming up. They'll probably hire anybody. And well, we weren't dressed, you know, we were just in t-shirts and flip-flops, and I wasn't shaving or anything. We just jumped out to go to the store. And my precious little bride said, oh, you could never get a job here. They would never hire you. You don't have any experience or anything like that. Well, I'm just the kind of guy that'd be waving a red flag in front of my horns when you say you can't do something. So I said, I'll be back in a minute. And I went and found the office, and I went and found the personnel and filled out a form, and that was that. And we went on about our day shopping. 2 days later, I get a call that we'd like you to come in and be trained for your new job. And I was told it was holiday, and I was told it was temporary. And what you do is you work about 6 weeks. You work through Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then the first 2 weeks of January, when there's all these returns, that's when we're really busy. And then after the second week of January, you will be laid off, along with all the other temporary holiday help, of course. Well, that's fine. That's all I expected. It was fun. I had fun. I must have learned something from my grandfather and the spike pounder story, because I wasn't just there for $6 an hour. I was having so much fun. And since I was a temp, this department would call down and say, oh, we really need somebody. And so I'd work at that department for 2 or 3 days. And then after that, another department would be shorthanded. So I'd work over there for 2 or 3 days. I worked in, I don't know, 8 or 9 different departments in this department store. And every department I worked in, I had the best time with those employees and that supervisor and those customers. And I was just having a ball, and I was getting paid for it too. You know, it just couldn't be better. And so after the 6 weeks was up and the holidays, and it was just a joyful every day in that environment. And then after Christmas, we had the returns, you know, and the 1st of January and the big January sales and all that. And so I got the call, you know, to go down to the personnel office, like everybody does, every temporary employee. And so I was ready to go down there and pick up my check and say, nice been knowing you, right? Well, when I got down to the personnel department to pick up my parting check, they said, come in and sit down. Really? Yeah. Oh, I thought, oh man, what did I do? You know, then I got to go sit down with the personnel director. And I sat down, and the personnel director said to me, we have 3 departments of the departments that you have worked in. 3 of the departments want to hire you full-time permanent. Which of those would you like to work with? So a very happy story with a very happy ending to my first venture out into the employment world. Thank you.
Great, Mark. Thank you. That was wonderful. So actually, those are all the tellers, but I got to be honest, we got a little extra time. And Nick, I was inspired by your stories, and it reminded me of something that I've been working on. I've been involved in a class and an ongoing workshop about personal stories. And see, I believe in the power of stories to affect the lives of other people. And I usually don't tell stories about my work, because I worked in mental health with teenagers and children. And sometimes it's hard to tell them, because I get such a reaction from people when they hear stories, no matter how I put them. But I think I just kind of worked this one out. So I think I'm going to tell it now, because we have time and I feel like it. So I found myself sitting in a multi-purpose room at the high school in Fairfield, California. The most popular boy in the school had cut school with lots and lots of his classmates the day before, and they had gone out to Lake Berryessa. And a horrible tragedy happened. This young man drowned in the lake in front of all of his classmates. They were all deeply affected. And so the principal put out a call that night to all the mental health facilities in the region and said, please send us some people tomorrow to do some groups with these kids. And so I was happy to go. They asked me, I was like, this is great. This is what I work towards, because you see, mental health was my second career. I was in my late 30s and I had worked hard to get there and gone to college, all that stuff you got to do. And so I drive out to the high school with one of my co-workers, and they usher us into this multi-purpose room, and we set up 10 stations. There was 10 counselors there all together, therapists, social workers, counselors like myself. An announcement came out over the intercom. The principal said, there's counselors in the multi-purpose room. If you need to talk, go. And about 150 kids meandered into that huge multi-purpose room, and they all started sitting in circles. And all those circles started to fill up, except for mine. Not one kid came and sat in my circle. And as I watched all those kids sitting down in all these other people's groups, I thought, of course, kind of being a little self-centered, I thought, what's wrong with me? And I was upset by that. And so I was kind of sad. And I just sat there, and about 10 minutes in, no more kids come in. People are doing their group work. And I'm like, man, this is a bust. And then all of a sudden, at the other end of the multi-purpose room, the door flies open and this woman comes walking into the multi-purpose room. She scans the room. She sees me sitting by myself, and she makes her way across the room. I mean, she bolted across the room, and she says, excuse me, but I'm the school counselor. I need help with this kid. Can you help me? And I'm still kind of feeling sorry for myself. So I said, sure, I'll help you. What do I got to do? So I get up and I'm just following her. I'm still, not in a very good mood. And I'm not even paying attention to where I'm going. She's yakking away. I'm not even listening. I'm just following her. I'm thinking, what the heck am I supposed to do here? But I followed her, and we go through the school. We go into this office. She ushers me into this room, and I sit down in a chair. She sits at the desk, and there's a young woman sitting across from me in a chair. She turns to this young woman, and she begins to speak in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. And they talk for like 10 minutes. So I'm just sitting there, and then all of a sudden the counselor stops. She turns to me and she says, well, this is what's happening. She said, this young woman has a boyfriend, and he has been missing for a week. She knows where he is, but she won't tell anyone. She won't tell the police. She won't tell the priest. She won't tell the parents. And she said, we are all at the end of our ropes. We don't know what to do. And I looked at her, and for a minute there, I was thinking, God, I got to get out of here. What am I going to do? I'm looking at the door. I thought, excuse. So I turned to her and I said, hey, I don't speak Spanish. And she said, oh, okay. Well, that doesn't matter. She said, I could translate for you. I thought, oh my God, I've never done that before. What am I going to do? And I really looked at that door again, thinking, you could be out in 10 seconds. Nobody even knows your name. But then I had this little voice in my head, my dad's voice. He used to say, he had this little saying, you must do what needs to be done. And I had made that choice to work with kids for 4 years at that point, and I had done it. So I took a deep breath. I looked at that young lady, and I did what I did every day. I just started talking to her. And then about halfway, after about 2 or 3 minutes, I told her a story. Because I learned early in my career that as a counselor, there was nothing that I was ever going to say to most of the people that I worked with that they hadn't heard already. So I learned to be truthful, to be direct, to be gentle, and to put the information that needed to be there in a story, because it's non-threatening. And so I just told this girl a story, a true story, a sad story, a story that she could relate to. And when I was done talking, she began. And she cried, and she cried, and she cried. And she told us what happened to the boy. She told us where he was, the whole shebang. And the counselor, as soon as the girl got done disclosing, got on the phone, called the police. Turned out that the boy had been kidnapped and was being held in a cabin way up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. The police took care of it and all that kind of stuff. But when the police showed up, they just ushered me out. I never saw that kid again. I never went back to that school. I did hear on the news that the perpetrator had been arrested, that kind of stuff. But that taught me an important lesson about just telling a story and doing what needs to be done and being in the right place at the right time and just speaking your truth. Thank you.
Good job, Dave.
All right, thanks. All right, well, we're still ending just a little bit early, but I want to thank everybody for showing up.
Well,
Yeah.
David, wait a minute.
Oh,
What did you do in your story that inspired her to tell you, do you think? What was your story? Do you remember?
well, I do, but I don't share that. See, that's why I don't tell the stories, because see,
Okay.
well, I'm just explaining it
Yeah.
because that's what people always ask me. Because the basic thing was I told her the truth. But telling people the truth isn't as easy as that sounds, and some people would do that and do harm.
Uh-huh.
So that's the thing is, that's why I tell the story like that. But it's, you know, it was really about a story because I worked with people and around very, very sensitive issues. If you talk to them directly, they're just going to tune you out. But if you talk about a story and they can relate to the story, then
Yeah.
that works. Oh,
That's great.
actually, you know what? We have 5 minutes left, and I just got a message in the chat from Stephen Hobbs, and he said, do you want another personal story? It's humorous. Heck yeah, let's do it. Let's end on a funny story. Take it away, Stefan.
Thank you. They met at a big band dance. Ron, who was a soldier, and Rosa, who was a hairdresser. They made a handsome couple, and they had that half-famished look that was so fashionable in 1947. Now, 15 years and 5 children later, they were living in army quarters in West Germany as part of the British Army of the Rhine. Rosa still loved her music, and Ron had bought her the very latest record player. It was the size of a small sofa. Of course, it had a cocktail cabinet where she kept her Pims and her baby sham, and all along the bottom there were pigeonholes to keep the records. Ron's records were on the far left. It wasn't that he didn't like music, it's just that he preferred music that was made by soldiers. He distrusted civilians, so his music was pretty much military music, the massed bands of the Grenadier Guards, and all the other pigeonholes belonged to Rosa, and her records were vast. She had Dionne Warwick, the Everly Brothers, Emma Sumac, and her favorite, which was Doris Day, all the Doris Day ones. And at the end of a long and busy day, and when you've got 5 kids, every day is a long and busy day, she would light up a cigarette, get herself a Pims, and put on a Doris Day and listen. And as I watched, I saw my mum disappear to another place. we heard our music and pretty much everything from the local radio. We had television in Germany, but it was in German. We didn't really understand it, but we had BFN, which was British Forces Network, which was in English. So we listened to all the fantastic programs, all the comedy and all the music. And our favorite was on Sunday. 12 o'clock in London, 1 o'clock in Cologne, home and away. It's two-way family favorites. And there, people from home, from Blighty, from England, and people in Germany would send requests, and we would hear all the latest music, Frank Sinatra, Matt Monro, and my favorite, which was Pat Boone. Now, this is in the early 60s. Now, I'm sure that the swinging 60s came knocking at our front door, but my mum would have answered, not like the look of it one bit, and said, not today, thank you, and firmly closed the door. But opposite our house lived Rick and Maureen Barton. Now, Rick Barton was a staff sergeant, just like my dad, and they were great pals. And his wife, Maureen Barton, well, Maureen Barton was bigger than life. And when you were kissed and hugged by Mrs. Barton, you stayed kissed and hugged. Now, they had a single son called Gary. He was tall, he wore glasses. He was what my mum would call a bit of a lummox. He was trip over his own laces, over the cracks in the pavement, but he had a heart as big as my mum's record player. And the best thing of all, he was my younger brother's best friend. So I got invited over to their house. Now, Gary had his own room. My goodness, what a room. There were carpets on the floor. There was posters on the wall. There was stuff everywhere. In comparison, my two brothers and I lived in a dormitory. We had lino on the floor. There were no posters on the walls. There was nothing there. No, I was mistaken. In the corner, there was probably a bucket, although sometimes I think I mix it up with the film Papillon. But the point I'm trying to make is it was very austere. In our house, you ate in the kitchen, you lived in the living room, you slept in the bedroom. If you were naughty and sent to your room, that was a real punishment because there was nothing there. In comparison, Gary lived like I would imagine paradise would be. Carpets and posters and stuff. And when we went round, his mum would say, drinks, boys? Now, that was a real treat. Once a month, the Bartons would get in their car, a Mercedes, of course. They would travel south to the American zone, and at the PX, they would buy Batman and Superman comics, 45 singles, Hershey bars, tins of corned beef hash, and bottles of sarsaparilla. And Mrs. Barton would say, sarsaparilla, boys, and she'd come in with a tray of glasses with sarsaparilla. We would sit on the floor. We thought we were so cool. And Gary would put on his record player. Now, he had his own personal record player, a Dan set, which was very compact, all in one, no separate speakers. It was fantastic. I would have swapped my two brothers, my two sisters, including the cute little one, for that Dan set. And he said, sit down, Stephen, I'll play you a record. And he put on this record. It was pop music, but they were singing in German. Sie liebt dich, ja, ja, ja. Sie liebt dich, ja. I said, are they German? And Gary said, no, they're an English band. Would you like to hear them singing in English? Yes, please. And he handed over this single, The Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand. So I put it on. Within 10 seconds, my life changed. I had discovered a new dimension. Pat Boone was history. Take it home for your ma. Take it home for your ma, said Mrs. Barton. Your ma would love it. And my mum did. There was a slight problem with changing from 33 1/3 to 45 1/2. But we got there, and when we put it on, the same thing happened again. Within 10 seconds, my mum got up and started to dance. Then she reached out a hand to me and said, I want to hold your hand. And I got up to dance, and we were all dancing, apart from my dad, who sat in the corner. When the record is finished, my mum passed it over to him. What do you think about this, Ron? She said. And my dad looked at the record. The Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand. If it's called I Want to Hold Your Hand, why are they singing I Wanna Hold Your Hand? We didn't have an answer for that. But for some reason, our life changed after that. My dad, he still didn't trust the Beatles. They hadn't done army service. They were definitely civilians. They were not army, but he bought us the singles. He bought us the albums. He took us to the films. And when a youth club opened up, which had a disco, I was allowed to go. I was never allowed to do anything like that before. And they had this fantastic disco competition, and the winner got a prize. And I went along just to watch, and somebody put on the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand. And without thinking, I just got up and did my mum dance. I was oblivious to everything that was going. But after a couple of minutes, I opened my eyes and realized that there were just two people dancing, me and Laura Curtis. And then the judge came up to me, put his hand on my shoulder and said I had won. They took me to the stage, and there on the stage were two prizes. I could choose the one I wanted, and Laura Curtis would get the second. The first prize, it was a James Bond gun, which was really a cigarette lighter. It was the Beretta, not the Walther PK, the proper one that James Bond liked, the Beretta. But on the right, oh my goodness, my heart stopped. And they'd opened it up so I could see the brilliant blue interior. On the right, there was a geometry set. It called to me. I loved geometry at school. There it was, a geometry set. How cool is that? Then I looked at the gun. I imagined myself holding that gun, looking into the mirror. Dung 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 dung. The name's Hobbs, Stephen Hobbs. The geometry set, the geometry set. I bent down to pick up the geometry set, but as I looked up, I saw the look of disgust on all my friends' faces. So I picked up the gun instead and took it home. By the time I got home, I was sick. I gave the gun to my mum. She sat there with the Pims, and she lit a cigarette with my James Bond gun and sat there smoking a cigarette. Now, many, many years later, I think it was 30 more years later, when my parents celebrated their golden wedding anniversary, I bought them a compact CD player, tiny compact, could fit in my hands, and a selection of CDs. For my dad, obviously, the massed bands of the Grenadier Guards, military music. For my mum, a handful of Doris Day's, and some Beatles stuff, the Beatles #1s, the remastered ones. My dad picked it up, he put it on, and he chose I Want to Hold Your Hand. And the same thing happened. My mum got up to dance, we were all dancing, apart from my dad, who sat in the corner. When it finished, my mum said, "What do you think, Ron?" And my dad said, "You know, all those years ago, I was right, wasn't I? I was right about the Beatles, wasn't I right?" And we had to look at him and say, "Yes, Dad. Yes, Dad, you were right about the Beatles." Thank you.
That was great, Stephen. Thank you for ending us on a high note today. We really appreciate that. I appreciate your style, your stories. So thank you again.
Still taste that sarsaparilla.
Oh, that's good stuff. Good stuff. Well, thank you again for taking your time to meet with us so late in the evening. So that's it for everybody. The meeting's pretty much over. We're out of time. We actually went a little over, so.
Just one thing, next month, the host will be Ed Lewis, and the themes, I assume, is gonna be spooky stories. I'm not positive about that.
Yeah.
But we hope you can all join us next month.
Yeah, put us on your calendar.
4th.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
First Saturday in October.
Thanks,
I'll be
everyone.
back.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Great stories.
Welcome. It was delightful.
Why is such a sucker for 3? I started at 3:30.
No, 2.
Okay.
That was
super
fun.
out.
That was fun, David. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. I appreciate you being here. Hey, we'll have to chat, Stephen.
Yeah.
I'll email you. We'll talk about some stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. Anyway, that's the end. That's the end of my day. It's the beginning of yours. What are you doing this afternoon then? Bit of surfing, bit of skiing, bit of spiking.
Yeah, lots of surfing. Internet surfing, that's about it.
Oh,
Yeah, so, but we'll be chatting soon.
okay, David. Right. Good night then. Thanks again for the invite. Good night, folks. Good night, folks.
Night.
See you. Thank you so much for coming from England.
Hey, Andy, I thought that went pretty well.
Great. Yeah, it was lots of fun.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of an echo there when you guys were sharing, so.
Oh, we got our, we got our microphone on?
Yeah, so when people were sharing, there was just a very faint background echo going on.
Okay.
There was, I mean, you can still hear really well, all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to let you know.
That's good. No, I appreciate it.
All right, man, I'm gonna leave. See you guys next time.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want me to